Welcome to The Bridge, From Surviving to Thriving in Medical School, a medical student podcast on success and belonging at UCSF. This series explores how medical students succeed and thrive in medical school through important relationships, academic support, well-being, and career exploration. I'm your host, Alvin Gwonga, a second year, or should I say third year now, medical student at UCSF. Thank you for joining us. Today's episode examines how medical students and faculty respond to mistreatment behaviors and what we can do about it. Everyone deserves to feel respected, seen, and heard in the places that we train and work. At times, all of us can fall short of these expectations. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our guests on how they've navigated mistreatment behaviors and how medical schools can foster a culture of respect and belonging. I would like to introduce two special guests in this episode. Dr. Denise Davis is a professor of medicine and the faculty director of student belonging at UCSF School of Medicine. Ali Gomez Ojeda is a fourth-year medical student in the UCSF School of Medicine. Denise and Ali, welcome. We're happy to have you.
We're so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us on today.
Thank you so much and good day.
To begin our podcast today, I'll start with Ali. What is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you?
One thing would be, we talked about that I'm a fourth-year student at UCSF. I'm applying into OBGYN. I guess that's a few things, but that would mostly be it.
And what is a role in the School of Medicine that gives you a lot of joy?
I had the wonderful opportunity to be the Anti-Oppression Curriculum Initiative Student Fellow from 2023 to 2024, and that role was so incredible. I loved it. I got to work with students every day and help advocate for what they needed. I loved that I was able to help be a liaison and a support person, and it was a really fantastic role. So that was definitely something that gave me a lot of joy.
And then for you, Denise, same questions as Ali. What is one thing that you would like our listeners to know about you? And what is a role in the School of Medicine that gives you joy?
I am here in the holy city of Oakland talking with you. And coming from a small town in Missouri and finding the Bay Area has been a joy that I experience on a daily basis. And the diversity, the culture of Northern California, and especially Oakland, makes me extremely proud, happy, rooted. And as long as I live in the United States, I will live in Oakland, California. In terms of my roles in the School of Medicine, as the lead faculty for the Diversity Matters orientation, I have gotten to experience longitudinal relationships of great meaning with staff, with the SET team, with faculty, especially the medical student coaches, and then also with the patient, the person in the patient role who speaks every year. Sharing that responsibility as teachers has been very moving. And then the students who arrive during launch week, my excitement and joy in imagining them, and then students exceed my imagination each year. That is truly a joyful experience.
I'm happy to hear that. As you know, this is my second year in medical school. I vividly remember DMO as being a wonderful start to medical school and really getting to know my classmates and centering ourselves on why we're really here. My next question is for you, Ali. How do you believe institutions can foster a culture of belonging?
I think there's so many ways that institutions can help foster this culture. One is having dedicated student spaces that are safe for those students to exist in, to be themselves in. There's a concept called identity safety that is based in the idea that when you can authentically show up to a space as your whole self with all of your identities, that you have that unique, different sense of safety. It's beyond psychological safety. And I think that those kind of spaces, the thing that's really important to creating them is being able to have institutional support for that. So whether that's through supporting affinity groups to have in-person gatherings, or through supporting initiatives like Denise may mention later on, but she hosts some really amazing underrepresented in medicine mentoring groups that are just so powerful and so wonderful. And I think when you have champions that are both coming from the faculty side and the institution side, like from leadership all the way down, when you have folks who are inspired to create this culture and support it, I think that's really where you have to begin in order to create that culture. You then, on the other hand, have to also have students who are from diverse backgrounds that are going to be able to support each other and build trust. So I think that comes into when we're thinking about recruitment processes for medical school. We know that it's a leaky pipeline to get URIM students into medical school at all. And so ensuring that you have enough folks to make sure that you're not the only one with this certain identity in your entire school is essential to establishing that culture of belonging too. Because if you're the only one, it's hard to feel like you belong.
For you, Denise, how would you define medical student mistreatment and talk about it in a trauma-informed way?
I have learned from my teachers that trauma-informed communication prioritizes people's choice and voice. And today, during this conversation, I want to let the listeners know I will not be talking about disturbing specifics of mistreatment, and I hope that will allow people to make the choice to continue listening. Listeners have a right to know that. Understanding people's choice, which is trauma-informed, is a dynamic process. And what any of us has experienced thus far in our personal and professional lives and our educational lives may not prepare us for what happens tomorrow. There's not a checklist. This is a dynamic process where we have to be present for ourselves and each other. However, we can begin to ask each other as we begin to learn together and work together, what is it that would make each one of us, what we know so far about who we are and how we operate, what would help us to be able to recognize, respond, and navigate mistreatment when and if it occurs? I want to say that mistreatment is common. It can take many different forms. One of the most common is the experience of students feeling publicly humiliated, often in clinical settings. That's negative, and the descriptions of purposefully induced embarrassment are in the literature and remind me as a faculty member, and I hope it will remind all of us, to be aware of how people are feeling in a public setting. The forms of mistreatment often are identity related, and in the literature, sexism is the most common source of these aggressions and microaggressions. I've also learned that mistreatment reports peak during clinical experiences when we get into that very fast thinking experience of workplace learning, responding to the needs of people in the patient role, the needs of staff, the needs of our team members. And that fast thinking is often associated with the intrusion of bias and therefore mistreatment. So very important for us to think about mitigating that by slowing down, not our work process, but slowing down our thinking and our relationships with other people. I'm reminded that mistreatment can be intentional or unintentional. It can result in burnout. It can result in career regret, anxiety, and other mood distress. These harms can undermine our very important self-care. And if we're not present, how can we be present in a healthy way for other people? In preparing for this conversation, Alvine, I, of course, in a nerdy way, went to the literature and found something that I wasn't even aware of that was in my blind spot, and that is neglect as a form of mistreatment. Students have reported that they are ignored, not seen, not responded to, not included in a way that helps them grow as people and as professionals. And this is now making me more aware of my own educational practices in order to be aware of how this can happen. Neglect is a form of mistreatment. And finally, I'll say that unfortunately, mistreatment is not confined to the educational space. We know that for young people, adverse events from childhood into adolescence and young adulthood happens, is common, may happen in one's family of origin, in primary or secondary education, in college, in workplaces, and in close relationships with intimate partner violence or other forms of mistreatment. Something I need to be aware of as I work with colleagues, with students, with superiors, that being tuned in to the human experience of people that I'm with is essential.
I so appreciate the way that you were describing all of the different ways mistreatment can occur. And I think back to just myself being a student, and I still am a student, and thinking about how so much of what you've described, I probably wouldn't have recognized as mistreatment in the time. And now, as I reflect back on my experiences, I recognize that some of these things were actually mistreatment. So I think there's a big misunderstanding, or I guess maybe lack of clarity in the moment that happens along with a lot of these experiences for students.
Ali, I definitely agree with you. I sometimes find that we forget to treat each other with respect. We forget to have compassion for each other. We forget that we all come from different backgrounds, have different potential traumas in our lives, and have different experiences that we can potentially bring to the plate. And something that I think about as I'm transitioning even into the clinical space is how to maintain that autonomy, how to maintain my sense of justice and agency within myself while still existing in this medical hierarchy. And Ali, being near the end of medical school, I wonder how you've experienced this.
I think the hierarchy is a big thing and definitely affects how you contextualize different incidents that happen and the power that you feel in the moment to speak up. Now I look back to myself at the beginning of my third year clinical rotations, and I was very afraid to speak up, and I was very hesitant, I think, because I was concerned about it reflecting poorly on me. Whereas now my lack of speaking up actually almost reflects more poorly on me because it's not true to who I am as a person and an advocate. And I try and put myself in the context of, if this happened to a friend or a patient, how would I respond? Because I think it allows us to step back and view the situations that we're in with a little bit more perspective and say, this isn't behavior that I would accept or tolerate happening to someone that I love. And now I think I have the thought process, recognizing I'm also someone that I love and I deserve equitable treatment. And so taking that step to stand up for myself, it's been, I think, easier as I have gone up in the medical education hierarchy now in my fourth year, but it's a skill. I think that takes practice.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate hearing that. Next question again is for you, Denise. Have you seen how mistreatment can be effectively recognized and navigated? And if so, can you please describe?
Thanks for asking, Alvine. I'll start with a story. Dr. Jack Mulligan had already earned my trust before I began my clerkships. His role was the equivalent of a medical student coach. His title was docent, but it was basically the same thing as a medical student coach. We had a long-term relationship. When he learned that I had been the subject of a resident's anger publicly, when I made an error, and it was a scary error, he came to me and asked me how I was doing. He listened. That was so helpful because I would not have spoken up. I would have stayed in that idea that I made an error and therefore I deserved that kind of public anger. I was so upset that I considered dropping out of medical school. His presence with me and that he had already laid the groundwork for me to be able to speak with him honestly and openly and frankly, emotionally with tears. That helped me navigate that experience. And though the agency in speaking up, I did not have that capacity at that point in my life, others stepped up. And that's my belief, is that it takes a village. It is not dependent on one person or two people or three, that it really is incumbent upon us all, faculty, administrators, staff, fellow students, senior students, residents, nurse practitioners, our other interprofessional colleagues, to continue to try to tune in to how we're treating others, to apologize when we are wrong and in error, when we slip in that way, and for others to step up and to be able to say, I noticed what happened. I'm so grateful to Dr. Mulligan. Though he has passed on, his memory will live in me forever, his kindness and his compassion in that way. So that is my challenge to listeners is, how are you developing your cadre of the people who are going to be there for you no matter what?
Thank you, Denise. Having community, having our village is really important. With that thought, can you describe some of the resources that an institution like UCSF has that can help students when they experience mistreatment, and what resources can prevent mistreatment from happening again? How can students best access and utilize these resources?
Culture matters. And there's a business expert who wrote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That it is so much about the norms of how we interact. And it's my hope that, for example, the Diversity Matters orientation begins to set the stage for intentional listening, for empathy, for recognizing that there are people of many different life experiences, backgrounds, identities, who have different layers of privilege and marginalization, so that we begin to build our relationships across silos with each other in a way that is protective and that will help us navigate when mistreatment occurs. There's not a checklist of here's the formula of the person or people to call, but there's a range. And this is not in order of importance, but I think it does loosely have an order of proximity. I know that in my work with medical student coaches as a faculty developer, coaches have high-intensity experiences with the students in their CMC groups, and that trust intentionally being earned in those relationships can provide, in some but not all cases, a place for students to talk about an experience that needs to be addressed, an experience of mistreatment, other adverse experiences. And in that community with coaches, there may also be students with whom one can begin to sound out, this is how I felt, this is what I thought. I'm not sure about whether this is mistreatment or not. And I want to say, as an extroverted thinker myself, it often takes me phoning a friend before I really even understand what is going on, what's happening, what are my feelings, what was the experience. Then I think of the student experience team that I am so fortunate to be involved with, that each member of the team has expertise in resources that are available in the School of Medicine at UCSF. That can be another source of information. And I know that knowledge is power. Understanding how things work can be so helpful to any of us. You've already mentioned, Alvine, peers and family members, and that it shouldn't be incumbent on our friends and family to understand. They can't often understand exactly what's happening in a medical school context, and yet they can be the source of love and support for us. I know that the SAFE form is in the weekly Medical Student Centered Digest, and that is a way to report mistreatment and has been very useful for students taking action and for those of us who are in roles that are powerful to understand what's happened so that we can intervene and take action so the mistreatment does not occur again. In addition, I've had the good fortune of working with our 2 care program leaders. They are confidential resources, highly skilled, extremely well-trained, and we're so fortunate to have them. There is also the Office of the Ombuds available for confidential mediation related to conflict with or without mistreatment. There is also the UCS Office of Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination. Also extremely skilled people who can help students and others in this domain of mistreatment. I wish that violence and severe forms of mistreatment did not happen, and yet I know it's rare, but they do. The campus police, as well as 911, are a resource when there's an emergency. When the distress is deep, though it may come from external, but it is an internal experience of extreme distress related to mistreatment, the 988 number for people who are feeling distressed, and a reminder that people don't need to be at the point of thinking of self-harm in order to call and ask for help. And I'm so grateful that this is a resource that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's also the medical student well-being team available for folks. So there's a plethora, and I know that one size does not fit all, and different things will help for different people.
One thing I think I could just jump in about the SAFE form, at least when I was going through my 3rd year, I felt like it was not utilized enough, probably by myself and other people, but definitely by myself as I reflect back on it. And I think one thing that I wish I had known maybe about the SAFE forms were that it's completely up to you whether or not you want to move forward with the deans or anyone else who's involved in that process to look for remediation. Because you can also use it as a method to just help the school to collect data about what's actually happening. Because I think oftentimes we all know that there's mistreatment going on and we hear about it all the time, but we're missing some of that. Think about it in academic medicine terms, the proof that water is wet. We have to really know that that's happening and have the real-time recording of it. So I would encourage folks, even if you're not sure that something is mistreatment or not, reporting in the SAFE reporting form really, it tends to just give you more options for support. And if you're trying to look for ways that you can work through the issue, it's a way to start that process. It doesn't have to be something that you're necessarily bound to do anything by. I think I thought like, oh, this is only for very serious things, but it definitely doesn't have to be. It can be microaggressions or more minor workplace mistreatment things that happen too.
Thank you both for that context. I often feel like when you start school, you're not thinking about what could happen, what can go wrong. And having these resources at the forefront is very prophylactic, because at least you know who to reach out to and what spaces to go to for support when you need it, rather than being in a moment of crisis. And sometimes you freeze, sometimes you don't really know who to reach out to, and it can be very isolating. So knowing that the institution has resources to help and to address mistreatment is really important. Thank you both for sharing. My next question is for you, Ali. What actions from our faculty or staff do you feel help students feel supported after experiencing mistreatment?
Thank you so much for the question. I love this. And I'm going to start it out with my own story. So when I was moving from F1 to F2, that transition is a really challenging time for pretty much everyone that goes through it. And when I was starting out third year, I was really trying to do my best every day and be 110% there. And I think I really burnt myself out really quickly because of all the cognitive load of being a third year medical student and the challenges that come with that, and being in a new environment where I wasn't as familiar with how I could use the resources. I had been feeling really burnt out, and I was looking for ways to have somebody listen. And I wasn't quite finding it in the places I had initially looked. And so what I ultimately ended up doing was I reached out to Denise, and we were able to meet in person and just talk. And I think one thing that was so amazing was, and she may have told me this later on, but to have somebody listen to you in order to understand rather than listening in order to respond, they're two completely different experiences. And when I went and spoke to her, it was because of the background of facing a lot of challenges and burnout and several instances of mistreatment. And I brought them to her, and she just listened. To me, the action of just listening in that way of listening to understand, it made me feel so supported after experiencing that mistreatment. And I think that it's a skill that not everybody has. And I'm sure it's taken years and years of finessing to be able to get to the way that Denise effortlessly does it these days. But I think that it's essential that there are structures where students truly feel listened to. Because I realized that I had reached out to other folks to try and get help or assistance with figuring out what to do after these episodes of mistreatment. And I didn't feel like I was ever listened to. I didn't feel like my complaints were ever taken seriously. And it was really frustrating to me, because when I would communicate them with my friends or other people, they would realize oh yeah, no, that wasn't fair. That shouldn't have happened. But then when I was trying to communicate it to some folks in leadership, it wasn't quite heard the same way. And so when I met with Denise, that experience of being truly listened to was what changed the game for me. And Denise mentioned that she felt like there was a breaking point after experiencing mistreatment where she considered leaving medicine. And I was in that same position when I came to talk to her, actually was very seriously considering leaving because I had been having such a difficult time. And I've tried to be really open with folks about this, because I think a lot of times we don't talk enough about the mental health struggles that students go through during their time in medical school. And in the literature, I feel like the rates of burnout are much lower than I actually feel like they are. But I think that we need to be paying attention to the students' mental health throughout the course of their time in medical school. And I would say particularly my mental health was extremely affected by experiencing mistreatment. And so I think that when we're developing a system where there are faculty and staff who are set up in positions to listen to students and have that training and background and being able to listen to understand, I think that it can really help students to feel supported, like how I did with Denise.
Thank you for that, Ali. And I want to say that I benefited from hearing your experience, to get to know you as a person, as a human being. And you earned my trust as you began to tell me over time the truths of your experiences. And as you were talking, Ali, I was struck by how, in addition to the mental health aspects of mistreatment that are very real, there's also a spiritual aspect, not in terms of religious, but in terms of our contact with the meaning of life and our existence. What is our meaning here? We can lose faith in ourselves and in the big picture when we're mistreated. And that is how I conceive of a spiritual wound, which is very serious and needs to be both prevented and addressed, because I believe that our work is soulful and is at its best connected to the human spirit of hope and connection and collaboration, and relates to our restorative justice principles that I'm learning so much about, that we are a community and no one is expendable, that harms happen. And through a process of continuous community building, honesty, and apology when we make errors, and restoring the dignity of people, including the person who is the offender, who is called the source of the offense, as well as the person who received the mistreatment, and the people who are the bystanders who we hope will become upstanders, that dignity can be restored.
Thank you both for your vulnerability. It's so disheartening to hear that you've both had these experiences that have made you consider leaving medicine and have really made you reconsider your place in this profession. Again, since I'm so early in my journey, I'm a little scared for what's to come. I know that there's a lot to be super excited about, but there's also a lot to be scared of. And I think about one of our professors, Dr. Dan Lowenstein. He really fundamentally believes that medicine is a calling. And when you talk, Denise, about that spiritual connection that you have to the work of medicine and to the healing that it brings, it makes me sad to hear about how the people that are called to heal, people that are called to such a difficult profession, also get wounded in this process. And it reinforces just how important it is that we take care of ourselves, but that these places that are here to train us also take care of us. And the people that are charged to teach us are not just our instructors, but they're also our caretakers in a way. And I'm really happy to have mentors like you, Denise, and to have a lot of mentors in the School of Medicine that also view teaching and education that way. And I hope that's a culture of medicine that we start to adopt, because this is hard. Already, this has been hard. I know that it will continue to be difficult, and we need a lot of support.
I'd like to remind students of your humanizing power. There are times it might be challenging, and I want to say that when I have been the recipient of a person who's in the student role, for example, just asking me how I am or how my day was, that is so humanizing and helps me be in touch with the fact that we're all caregivers for each other. And yes, I have a special responsibility as a faculty member with a role that has power connected to it, that I really need to go a long way in terms of being aware of my own actions, skills, intentionality, ethics, values, and we're all connected. And I have really had such great experiences with students being my healer.
I'm happy to hear that. This next question is for you, Ali, and it really has to do with a bit of the hierarchy of medical training. Students often feel that their grades or careers may be negatively impacted if they report instances of mistreatment. How do you navigate this tension?
I think it's a really real fear that exists. My first tendency is to think about, oh, you should just always report everything and just go through the safe form and do all these things. But the reality is, when you're the only student on a rotation, and if there's going to be action that happens immediately, there is always a risk that you have in reporting mistreatment that it could potentially come back to you. But what I would say is that it's going to ultimately be helpful to you to involve more people in these instances of mistreatment. So if you are able to communicate the harms that have happened to somebody who's in a higher leadership role, like potentially a clerkship director or somebody who's even at the dean level potentially, that can help to insulate you from repercussions, because then it's no longer between you and whoever it was that had done the mistreatment. It's beyond that. And as an institution, UCSF really does have a lot of commitment to the well-being of our students and the well-being of our community. And especially when you're able to potentially contact somebody that's higher up in that hierarchy, you can help mitigate the effects of you being lower in that hierarchy. So in a clerkship where I had had a negative interaction with a faculty member, reaching out to the clerkship director was often what I had done. And then through those conversations with the clerkship director, determined whether or not I needed to directly speak to that person again, or if the clerkship director would be able to communicate the harms or at least the lessons learned from that instance of harm to that person and do some reparative justice, I would say that way. It definitely is a real tension though. And I don't want to say that it doesn't exist or pretend that it's not something that you would need to think about. But I do think that often the benefits from reporting mistreatment, which can be the ultimate improvement of the curriculum or the dynamics between whoever it was that did the mistreatment behavior and future students, will be likely improved as a result of these difficult conversations. So find your allies. And coaches, like Denise said, are also a great first person to reach out to. And even if you're needing to say like, hey, who should I reach out to next for support? They can be that person often that will help you to navigate moving that complaint or that concern to the appropriate level.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you find that when you include the clerkship director, for example, that they're understanding or they listen when you speak with them? Or have you found this to also be another hurdle in having to continue to report this mistreatment?
I've been really fortunate to have all of the clerkship directors that I've communicated mistreatment behaviors to be very sympathetic and understanding and very proactive in addressing the concerns with whoever they occurred with. I think that if there is a case in which a clerkship director isn't so supportive, and if you don't leave that conversation feeling like, okay, I trust this person to be able to handle the rest of this conflict, then I would suggest maybe going even one step higher. I would actually say it doesn't necessarily have to be one step higher in the hierarchy, but just at least somebody who is on a similar level, somebody that you trust, maybe a clerkship director for a different clerkship, or potentially a coach, or potentially someone who runs a block in F1 that you're close to. I think that all of those people, though we see them in different contexts, they're all kind of in communication. Most of the faculty members often know each other. And if that initial interaction with the clerkship director isn't exactly what you need, I would reach out to other folks who are at that same or a higher level in this hierarchy to see their reflections on it and see what they can do. I think reaching out for help is something that I've learned to be completely underutilized and super valuable among students. Though we feel as students that we don't have very much power, in the eyes of the faculty, we have a lot of power. And it's interesting, and I've only been able to really see this through my role as the AOCI student fellow. The faculty really value what we think, and they value what goes on their evaluations. They value what shared values that we all have, which is creating a better school and a better environment for everyone to learn in.
Are there any strategies that you have utilized or you know that your colleagues have utilized when advocating for themselves while trying to minimize the repercussions of mistreatment?
Yeah, well, one is definitely trying to reach out to folks who are higher up in the hierarchy than whoever the initial mistreatment behavior was with. But also, I think that using collective experiences and speaking to peers about similar episodes of mistreatment that may have happened to multiple students from the same person, there's a lot of power in that too. So I think as much as you're able to really be in community with the people that are going through this experience with you and maybe experiencing similar things, you have a lot of strength as an individual, but you have even more strength when there's multiple people behind you and multiple people who have experienced something similar. So I think talking to other people about experiences is really, really powerful.
As we are wrapping up our podcast episode, I just want to thank the both of you so deeply. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Allie, for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us as we think about how to respond to mistreatment behaviors in this learning environment. I have a final question for both of you as we sort of wind down our episode for today. And the question for you, Denise, is what might our listeners do to foster belonging for others here at UCSF?
Again, I'll start with a story. My mentor cooked for me in medical school. I'm not expecting that every safe harbor person will cook for their students, but that was a manifestation of her caring for me as a person. She also met my mother and then my daughter, who was a baby then, and welcomed me into her office and shared space with her adult children and even her grandchildren. She was my safe harbor. I could talk with her about almost anything. She gave advice when I asked her, but she did not give unsolicited advice. She was very restrained. I believe she's the reason that I was able to navigate difficulty. I'm so grateful to her, and I've always wanted to be like her when I grew up. I'm still working on the growing up part, to be there as a human being for other people, whether they're in the student role or the trainee role, co-faculty role, the dean's role. Deans are people too. I'm so grateful to Eric Hung, who is my supervisor and who I want to name explicitly as a wonderful resource for students navigating what are mistreatment or other adverse circumstances during medical school. Dr. Hung is truly a humanistic advocate, and students should not hesitate to reach out to him. So the challenge to the listener is, how will you continue to develop your recognition of how you're treated with respect and dignity, and even giving appreciation and reinforcing feedback to the people who do that so that they'll do more of it? How will you continue to tune your own awareness, thinking about and feeling about when things are uncomfortable, and being able to, whether it's through journaling or psychotherapy or conversations with others, to be able to hone down to what the nugget of the problem is in order to then take action. Part of the action is actually understanding one's own experience. And as you said, Allie, that you're a person who deserves love. I'm hoping that students will also feel that they deserve love, care, respect, dignity. And when they're not perceiving that, having the village. Who are the members of your village?
Thank you, Denise. Thank you so much. And my question for you, Allie, is very similar. What do you think our listeners might do to foster belonging for others here at UCSF?
I think one really important thing that I have realized lately, especially I will say within the past 3 weeks or so since November 6th, is the importance of community and building community with the folks around you. I think that the initial relationships of trust that you build when you're starting medical school are such a great and sacred thing. And then continuing to deepen, build on those relationships and form new relationships with other people, continuing to build that community across your class and across other classes. I think one thing that my class missed out on a little bit because we were the COVID class was getting to meet everybody in person. And I think now it's been so powerful to get to see interacting with the incoming MS1s this year and then the MS2s that are about to start their third year is just how integrated they are with each other's lives and how strongly they have built community with each other. And I'm so excited when I see that. And I'm honored every time I get to be a part of any circle with other medical students. I'm always really, really excited because it is amazing to realize that pretty much everybody at UCSF is coming to medicine with a hope and a dream. And we all can find others who share similar facets of that dream. And that's where we find our people in our community. And we keep saying that phrase, but it's just so important finding your people within your class, within all the 4 classes, within the faculty, because there are faculty that have similar thoughts and values to you too. And if you haven't found that person yet, keep looking because they're out there. And email Denise about it because if you don't know them, she does.
That is so true. I feel like Denise is like our opening to everyone at UCSF.
Yes.
Thank you for talking about your personal experiences and how it shaped how you view how we handle mistreatment and how we approach caring for ourselves in instances of mistreatment. I really appreciate that. In our episode today, we've learned about how students can identify microaggressions when they occur. We've talked about how to create an environment of belonging and respect, and how we can connect students to the school and campus resources when mistreatment behaviors do occur. Thank you for joining us in this episode, and don't forget to tune into other episodes in this series on medical student success. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Bridge, and please look for more episodes in our series. The Bridge is brought to you by the UCSF Academy of Medical Educators Innovations for Funding in Education program. Our hosts are Alvin Gwanga and Dr. Nakai Corral. Our production staff are Dr. Eric Hung and Valerie Jones. Our sound engineer is John Oliver. Our music is by Duke Q, Wax Roof, Mabanwa, and Les Imprimes, courtesy of Big Crown Records.